Now, if you want the true origin story of the DIXIE Mafia that you saw in Phenix City Story, look no further than the Ritz Cafe that was right here. Now, the story with this is that in the Great Depression, an outsider named Jimmy Matthews arrived looking for work, knowing that Columbus and Phenix City had a huge number of jobs at the mills right across the river. The mills that Jimmy Matthews was hoping to find work in are located on the western edge of the Chattahoochee River. They've been open since long before the Civil War and had a reputation of creating a sort of culture around this area where the wealthier residents would live over in town and the poor mill workers would live right here in Phenix City. Now, as he was walking around looking for work, he was recognized by a man named Clyde Yarborough, a more seasoned gambler. And Clyde saw that Jimmy Matthews was a man who didn't shy away from hard work, and it seems like he pulled a couple of strings for his new friend and got him jobs working out of Fort Benning, just over here to the west of the river. Your average mill worker living in Phenix City and working out of Columbus, Georgia, if he was frugal, could save up about $9 for his life savings every week. This made life in Phenix City incredibly hard, but thanks to the patronage of Clyde Yarborough, Jimmy Matthews was able to save up $11,000 after a couple of years working at Fort Benning. Now, I keep focusing on this building at 500 Dillingham Street because it's the first operation run by the modern Phenix City mob. After about a year of saving up $11,000 at Fort Benning, Jimmy Matthews saw a penniless Hoyt shepherd walking around town, struck up a friendship with him, and realized that he could be a very good frontman to something like this. He opened up the Ritz Cafe and catered to the friends he'd already made at Fort Benning, which is just across the bridge. Now, the local law enforcement here for decades had been very receptive to opening gambling institutions and liquor halls, pool halls, lotteries, if you paid them for protection. Now, during that period of martial rule in 1954, a Lieutenant Martin Wyman was investigating the Ritz Cafe and found that it was a front for something they called the Old Reliable Lottery, operated by both Shepherd and Matthews right out of the back of this store. Eventually, it spread to the Yellow Front Cafe, the 514 Club, and Gerard Cleaners. So you can see that the original headquarters for the Phenix City mob was right on the western edge of Bridge Street at the intersection with Brickyard Street. In fact, this was once called Bridge Street Grocery and was found to be the headquarters of Metro Lottery, run by C.O. Revel, another Mafia associate. And when the National Guard took over, they said there is no evidence that any groceries were ever sold at Bridge Grocery. And by the way, if you want to visit these sites, back in the day that was 401 Dillingham Street, but now it's the Trek Bike Shop at 507 Dillingham Street, right across from the modern-day courthouse. This wasn't here back during the takeover of 1954. And this is where the Phenix City mob of Hoyt Shepherd and Jimmy Matthews really begins, right across from the mills, which you can see in the background there. You had the Ritz Cafe, the Bama Club, several different lotteries, gambling halls run by different men, grocery stores that didn't even sell groceries, and it was all right here, just across the river from Fort Benning. Another heart of the gambling operations here in Phenix City was right here, 608 16th Street, right around the corner from the same building leased out to the Freemasons of Phenix City. So these institutions were very well protected for a very long period of time. Godwin Davis was surprisingly willing to talk to reporters about suspicious deaths and murders leading up to Patterson's assassination. Very shockingly, he actually talked about Fate Leeburn, who was killed in 1946. Now, Fate, or Fate Leeburn, was a rich man from the same small town as Hoyt Shepherd, another mafioso. Apparently, Hoyt Shepherd was pretty jealous of him because the Shepherd family was stuck in Phenix City, and Fate was successful in Columbus, opening a seedy hotel called the Cardinal Hotel. They were constantly asking for girls 19 to 23 in the papers, and this hotel was at 5th Avenue and 12th Street in Columbus. Fate was dipping his toes into city politics, but was at his heart a businessman. He ran the Georgia Music Company and sponsored girls for beauty contests. One of these, Miss Edna Hoyt, accompanied Fate Leeburn over the 14th Street Bridge to the Southern Manor. This was about a mile outside Phenix City on the road to Opelika and was named Club 241. They were celebrating the election of Elmer Reese to city commissioner. Now, Elmer was a young Freemason and one of the first men shipped off to the Pacific, and he was also very friendly with organized crime. Reese was a friend of all the mobsters and eventually became mayor during the city's heyday, but resigned in late 1954. Hugh Bentley was watching this election along with a few other activists, but for the most part, they decided to keep their heads low this time. Attempts were made on his life later, but at that time, the city was run by vice. But to pick back up on Election Day, we join Hoyt Shepard congratulating all city government workers and their fraud by buying them free drinks. The party died down a bit, and Hoyt found himself surrounded by several important gangsters, all very loyal to him. Notably, there was his brother, his old mentor, Clyde Yarborough, and his partner in crime, Jimmy Matthews. The gang laughed it up, having successfully run the two Hughes out of town, and when they spotted Fate Leeburn from across the bar, Hoyt quietly offered $20 to a stripper to leave out the back and did the same for the floor manager. The stripper heard 2 shots. Fate was killed, and the manager was never seen again. One of the most well-known names associated with the Phenix City mob is Hoyt Shepard, one of their leaders. However, after the murder of Fate Leeburn, one of the first men arrested was Hoyt's brother, Snooks Shepard. Papers immediately pointed out that Snooks was the representative of the Bama Club, sort of the public face of organized crime around the Columbus area, and that he was a very close associate of most of the mobsters around Phenix City and Columbus. However, eventually all of these allegations fell through, and Snooks was free to associate with the clubs and the gambling institutions along 14th Street once again. At the time, the chief of police in Phenix City was a man named Pal Daniels. Both of the Shepard brothers were arrested, but because the police chief was just as much a gangster as either one of them, Snooks was acquitted, and his brother Hoyt never even faced trial. We're looking now at the home of Clyde Gordon, a locally infamous desperado who was killed in a shootout in September of 1950. Now, to understand the robbery and the lead up to it, you need to have a better understanding of the Davis family, which controlled Phenix City through politics and through a little bit of well-placed coercion. J. Godwin Davis Sr. owned the entire southern side of 14th Street, and folks called him the Slot Machine King. He only died in 2013, and I've been having a hard time finding his memorial. His son, Bubber Davis, owned the Manhattan Cafe, and their headquarters was at the 209 Comer building, which no longer exists, the Davis Loan Company near 14th Street Bridge. Bubber Davis was building his own little empire, and with his dad's help had the Silver Slipper Club and the Manhattan Cafe, which were both connected on the main street. On top of both was the Manhattan Club, the headquarters of an illegal lottery. In September 1950, Bubber's Cafe was robbed. Local desperado Clyde Gordon, who lived in this house, was probably the mastermind. He lived at 906 14th Street and worked with his buddy Clarence Johns, who lived in Columbus but hailed from Waycross. During the getaway, Johns was shot and wounded. He stumbled to the getaway car with the money, and the two drove 12 miles west out of town, where they buried the money in a historically black abandoned cemetery and dressed John's shoulder wound. Clyde then left his friend Johns in the cemetery and crashed his car into an oncoming truck driven by a woman from Texas, unfortunately killing both of them. This attracted cops to the cemetery. Johns got in a shootout with the police, and Deputy Albert Fuller, a well-known person connected with the Dixie Mafia, claimed that Johns fired at them, so he filled him full of lead. Police Chief Pal Daniels confirmed the story, although the two would be deposed by General Hanna when the Army seized the town in 1954. One man that I'm shocked is never really discussed when talking about the Phenix City mob is Congressman Ben Cole. Now, when you look at the Phenix City mob, you have the elderly Clyde Yarborough as sort of patriarch of the organization, with his front man, Hoyt Shepard, and the doer, Jimmy Matthews. However, Cole seems to have taken a prominent position behind the curtain. The fact that Ben Cole never even really hid his ties to the Dixie Mafia really indicates how deeply corruption ran through Russell County. In fact, when they went to go bail him out, he was seen gambling with other people pretty jovially, and remarked very casually to the papers that he had owned a gambling hall for 14 years and had gotten out of the business. But ever since, he owned a 50-50 stake in the 541 Club with Matthews and Shepard. And then the story goes dark. People don't really discuss him anymore. He's not a major figure in the Dixie mob here in Phenix City. So if you ever find yourself asking why so many of these crucial players got off scot-free, look no further than Representative Ben Cole. Clyde Yarborough, the sort of elderly patriarch of the Phenix City mob and owner of Yarborough's Cafe, was the old mentor to Hoyt Shepard. His wife, Eunice, was shot by the wife of a bona fide Dixie Mafia assassin in 1930. This much was asserted by Hoyt Shepard, who said the case was pretty well blown open already once the National Guard moved in 1954, although he claimed the assassin's wife shot her. Jimmy Matthews, an enforcer for Hoyt Shepard, saw the wife of C.O. Revels looking for her husband for a few hours in one of the bars. She eventually found her husband in a car with Mrs. Yarborough and shot her. The cops took C.O. Revels to jail for his own protection, and Albert Fuller called Hoyt Shep to report that they were holding the man. Deputy Fuller said it would be a good idea to talk to Clyde just to make sure he knew the situation. His wife had just shot the wife of another gangster, but she was expected to live. Oddly enough, she died in 1930. Her obituary lists her as Clyde's wife and claims she died after a short illness at his home, 2711 Buena Vista Road in Columbus, Georgia. Now, it's interesting to note that Revels' wife shot Miss Yarborough because Revels was a well-known Dixie Mafia assassin, or at least a fixer. In 1944, a J.R. Stringfellow was assassinated and 5 men were indicted for the murder. Apparently, Stringfellow was going to testify against a man in an Opelika booze case. This man paid 4 others to make Stringfellow disappear. According to the 4 men in jail, C.O. Revels and Godwin Davis, the kingpin of organized crime in Phenix City, arranged for the hit. Patterson defended Revels, Davis, and Allred and got them off, while the 4 men languished in prison, 2 of them for life. So Patterson felt very guilty, but the question now is, did Revels' wife shoot Miss Yarborough, or was it him? He was an assassin. During the Phenix City roundup, the former mayor was accused of selling babies. Dr. Seth Floyd was only mayor for 2 months in 1953, but by the time of the cleanup, he was the town commissioner. The National Guard, under Crack Hanna's command, charged him and his wife with illegally advertising babies for adoption. Papers reported that Patterson was representing a young, unwed mother who wanted her baby back, which may have been tied to Dr. Floyd, although the case was a misdemeanor and carried a maximum of 3 months in jail. In 1951, Patterson claimed Miss Floyd had sold off so many babies she couldn't keep track of them, and the doctor claimed descent from a prominent family. His father was also mayor at one point, a doctor and practicing physician in some sort of public office for 44 years. The former mayor recovered from this blemish and received community awards, dying at his home in 1975, here at 2113 9th Avenue, Phenix City. In 1957, though, his daughter Gloria shot and wounded her husband. She had 2 other husbands under her belt, and her divorce to Bubber Davis in 1950 blew the lid off the gambling operation that would eventually be the end of the Phenix City Mafia. The 1957 shooting happened right here at 3524 Hamilton Road in Columbus. Her previous husband of the Davis clan is buried here, William Robert Davis. That means that her father-in-law was the king of slots. Now, in the same cemetery is the grave of Hoyt Shepard, the leader of the Dixie Mafia, and Pal Daniel, the Phenix City Chief of Police. You've also got the grave of a victim of Wilson's Raiders, unknown only to God. And what's so interesting about this is when Sherman initiated his March to the Sea in November 1864, many other Union officers wanted to do something of the same. They wanted to write their memoirs with one last final action of the Civil War, and one of these was a raid that was conducted across Alabama and into Columbus, Georgia. This was very often seen as a raid that was totally unnecessary for the war effort, and it killed a lot of people who'd been decommissioned and were expecting the war to come to an end. Hoyt Shepard Sr. was the main leader of the Phenix City mob, and he died in 1980 at his home right here at 3506 5th Avenue in Phenix City. One obituary noted that he said all the way back in 1961 he just wanted to live a quiet life and not be involved in gambling or liquor, and actually did seem to become something of a philanthropist after this. His pallbearers were a who's who of finance and former gambling: Robin Mullins, an insurance underwriter; Duke Gillette, a popular barber in the city, who, prior to that, had a grocery shop on the infamous 14th Street, never seems to have been caught in '54, but started trying politics in the '60s by running for local town council and commanding the American Legion. I've come back to the humble grave of Hugh Bentley, the celebrated reformer from the Russell County Betterment Association, because I found something out in my research since my last video that his father, Calvin, was one of the earliest men to bring vice to Sin City. See, Calvin and his wife Minnie had 7 children, and Hugh was the youngest. Well, Calvin decided to capitalize on the rowdy soldiers over there at Fort Benning, opening up underneath their family home a one-stop shop for all things alcohol and gambling. Eventually, his wife Minnie had enough and brought their children over to an apartment to work in the mills. This left a lasting impact on Hugh Bentley. And the cemetery here overlooks downtown Phenix City, and you can see Columbus across the river.